all right. If you need to get a coat at any point, please do. But thanks very much for attending, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Strategy and Resources. My name is Tom Hunt. I'm the leader of the council and chair of the committee. The meeting, as always, is open to the public, and there's no items today that are exempt. It's going to be webcast as per usual. We've received one remit question for today's meeting, and a written response has been provided to that individual. There's no supplementary questions that have been received, and no member questions either. If I could just ask everyone to switch phones off, and there's no fire test planned, and if there is an emergency evacuation, we go out to Tudor Square, and staff will direct us there. I'll ask the members of the committee, as always, to introduce themselves first, followed by the officers who are here, starting on my left.
Hi, I'm Douglas Johnson, Chair of Housing.
Angela Argento, Chair of Adult Health and Social Care.
Zahira Naz, Chair of Finance.
Good morning, Abdul Qayyum, Councillor Firth Park, Chair of Licensing Subcommittee.
Councillor Dorndale, Chair of Education, Children and Families.
Councillor from Belbin, Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Ben Miskell, Chair of Transport, Regeneration and Climate.
Councillor Joe Watson, Chair of Waste and Street Team.
Sheffield Mohammed Eccles Award.
Councillor Curtis Crossland, Local Councillor for Bayton and Chair of Communities, Parks and Leisure.
Councillor Martin Smith, I'm Chair of Economic Development, Skills and Culture.
Good morning, Councillor Diane Hurst.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'll now ask the officers to introduce themselves, starting again on my left, please.
Morning, everyone. Claire Taylor, Chief Operating Officer.
Hello, Meredith Teasdale, Strategic Director, Children's.
Morning, everyone. James Henderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Good morning, Kate Joseph, Chief Executive.
Good morning, David Hollis, General Counsel.
Morning, Craig Rogerson, Democratic Services.
Good morning, Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Good morning all, Greg Felt, Director of Public Health and Integrated Commissioning.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. No apologies received for today, and as I said, no items that contain any exempt information. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any members who wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on today's agenda? Nope. Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting are on page 11 in your agenda packs. Are members happy to approve them as a correct record of the meeting that we held last month on the 16th of October? Great, thank you. Item 5 is public petitions and questions. As I've mentioned already, we received one remit question for today's meeting. Response has been provided, which will be published, and then no supplementary question to that was received. Item number 6, member questions, none received today. Item number 7 is retirement of staff, and as always, I will ask members to join me in thanking the members of staff who are listed in the report who are retiring for their many years of long service and dedication to this council and to providing public services in this city. Are members happy to join me in that and to approve the report? Thank you. Item number 8 is our committee's work programme, and with that I will ask Craig to just run us through that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members have a copy of the latest work programme in item 8. Since the last meeting, we've got 3 new items, 3 amended items, and a couple of referrals from Council. So just to run through those in the order that they appear in the report. The references from Council, which members will be aware of, relating to the winter fuel allowance, which was a petition and a motion on a safer square, are set out on pages 23 and 24, and there's recommended responses set out there. Just by way of an update, the bid for Violence Reduction Unit grant funding for this year's festive period has been successful. In terms of the amended items on page 25, I'll just draw your attention to the ethical procurement policy. The enactment of the new legislation and the associated policy statement is not now expected to go live until February 25. So as a result, it's proposed that we delay our report until that time, and it's proposed that finance and performance should consider that item. And then finally, Chair, just on the cross-cutting items identified on page 26, following discussions at the pre-agenda meeting, it is considered that the gambling harm prevention item is a truly cross-cutting item and should be considered by this committee.
Thank you very much, Craig, for those updates on the work programme and also for sharing the news that the funding has been received for the Safe Square initiative to continue over the festive period. So that is good news. I've got Councillor Johnson and, oh hang on, I've got Councillor Johnson first, Councillor Smith, Councillor Crossland. Thank you.
Thanks. Two quick points. One is on Safe Square. Thanks for answering that question before I'd asked it, Craig. It's actually really good news, and certainly in light of one of the items coming up on the agenda later on. A quick question was on the gambling harms point you mentioned there. It's a cross-cutting issue going right across those. On the members to be briefed, it would be sensible, I think, to include members of the licensing committee in there as well as the policy committees. Could we agree to that? They're the ones who actually have to make decisions on that. Thanks.
I think that would be a very sensible suggestion, and I'm sure that the co-chair of licensing would agree with me on that point. Excellent. Councillor Smith, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Craig, just a simple question. I'm looking through the work plan. Can you just remind us what the colour coding is there? Some are amber, some are green, some haven't got any coding at all. So can you just remind us, please?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. Yeah, the green ones are the new ones since the last meeting, and the orange ones are the ones that have been moved around, amended.
Thanks.
Councillor Crossland?
Thank you, Chair. It's freezing in here, never mind in a home where people can't afford to keep their heating on. And I'm just a bit frustrated with the last SNR meeting finished early. I think this one is set to finish early as well. But yet the response to the winter fuel cut has still stayed in December. I think with Mr. Trick bringing that forward, I'd also like to know if we have to wait until that is discussed before you send the letter to the Chancellor.
Thanks, Councillor Crossland. This has been tabled for the December meeting for some time and discussed at pre-agenda meetings with all group leaders. So the work programme shouldn't be a surprise at the point that you're seeing it today. And as I said at full council, and I've just said to you and colleagues now, very happy to have that conversation around that letter. Doors always open. I don't think, we've got a full agenda today, so I think any suggestion that this committee is going to be finishing early isn't correct. We've got a lot of important business to be considering today, and in December we will consider the work that the Council's cost of living team are doing to support people doing important work like boosting the uptake of pension credit, and to discuss the extension of the Household Support Fund, which, as members will know, was extended in the October budget. So a lot of important time will need to be set aside in December for that to be discussed. So hopefully that answers your question. Are members happy to approve the work programme? I don't see any other hands. Great, thank you. Okay. Item number 9 is the Sheffield Strategy for Tackling Domestic and Sexual Abuse and Violence Against Women and Girls. And I'm really pleased that we're joined today by some guests who have come to talk to us both about the report that we've got in front of us, but also about the work, the really important work that they all do in the city related to this item. Once everyone has got a seat, I'll perhaps ask everyone to introduce themselves and then ask the officer team to introduce the report before we open it up for conversation. So perhaps starting on my left and on the right of the table. Greg, please.
Thanks, Chair. Greg Fell, Director of Public Health and Integrated Commissioning.
Alison Higgins, Domestic and Sexual Abuse Commissioning Manager.
Sam Martin, Head of Commissioning.
Hello, I'm Holly Venn and I'm the Chief Executive of Sheffield Women's Aid.
Hi, I'm Miracle Carney. I'm Chief Exec of Sheffield Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre.
Hello, I'm Diane Johnson. I'm Detective Superintendent in South Yorkshire Police, based in Sheffield.
Thank you all very much for joining us. We know how busy you all are, so we do appreciate you taking the time out to come and join us for this conversation about the important report that we're about to consider. So with that, let me ask the team from the City Council to just briefly introduce the report before we then open up for conversation around this.
Thanks, Chair. 30 seconds from me. Clearly, this is an important public health issue. It has an enormous impact on the women concerned, their families, and a much wider ripple impact. The ask on the committee is to note the annual report and agree the content of a new strategy, which expires this year, hence the new strategy. There are very strong arrangements, and to finally note the excellent work in this space across many, many, many partners. Credit to those who've done the work and those who do the work who aren't here today.
So just briefly to introduce the overall report and the strategy, Chair and Committee. Domestic and sexual abuse affects thousands of people across Sheffield as well as nationally every year. We're really proud in this city of the partnerships that we have and the organisations that we all work together across a whole bunch of boundaries to sort of try and tackle the issues. And the Council obviously has a really important leadership role to play as part of that wider partnership. The strategy that we've worked together on for the last sort of 4 or 5 years comes to an end this year, and so what's in front of you as a committee today is a new strategy for the next 6 years, which will continue to tackle issues around domestic and sexual abuse and violence against women and girls. The strategy is called From Surviving to Safety. It's been the result of a whole load of really hard work, both in my team, in other partner organisations, some of whom are with us today, and consultation with survivors and victims themselves. And by adopting that, we're kind of taking that leadership role as a council and working with those partners to really tackle what is a kind of a really big issue for society and for our city. I would just maybe ask Holly, Mira and Dan maybe just introduce briefly their organisation and their role and say anything that they'd like to about both the role and the strategy and the work going forward. That's okay.
Yep, thank you, and thank you for having me here today. So we are Sheffield Women's Aid, and we are 50 years this year as a small specialist charity, which is actually quite a feat in the, I guess, the challenging financial climate for charities. And we wouldn't be here as a charity 50 years young, as I like to think of it, without the support of Sheffield City Council and particularly the Domestic Abuse Commissioning team, who have supported us to sort of grow and develop the services that we offer, and particularly in relation to the strategy. Sam and Alison and her team were really inclusive around making sure that we had our voices heard as professionals delivering the service to help shape that the strategy. Also really inclusive about including the survivors that we support, and made a real effort to make sure that they had the opportunity to be involved in that strategy. And I can see their lived experiences and their voices clearly coming out in that strategy. So we have a really positive relationship with the DACT team. You know, for example, we will be delivering some more units outside of our 37 units that the council commission, and Alison was really supportive of us being able to grow and develop that, because we know that there's a shortage in the city. So yeah, really pleased to work in partnership with the DACT team.
Hi, so Sheffield Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre. I was going to virtually say what Holly said, but she said it now, so I'll cover something else. Sheffield Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre, in various guises, has been in the city for about 40 years. We're a very different outfit than we are now. So when we started, it was just a few women answering phone calls, listening to other women and their experiences. We're now a team of nearly 40 people that receive about over 100 referrals a month, so about 12 100 in a year. We have about 300 active cases at any one time. We see people of all ages and genders, including children, and we provide both counselling, therapy and group work, but we also provide support through the criminal justice system to survivors that have reported and are going through investigations or subsequent court processes. So really, I want to echo what Holly said. We've gone through a real journey, I think, in our commissioning relationship with the council from when I first started 12 years ago to where we are now. And I echo about how we definitely feel listened to. The multi-agency groups that both Holly and I sit on as providers, we get such a lot out of it in terms of thinking of service improvements and development. We really get the opportunity to put our clients, our survivors forward and get them involved in work. And being part of this strategy and being listened to, and I can see specific items that we've raised now incorporated in this document, it's been very valuable, and I think it gives a legitimacy to us when we're out there campaigning or talking to people about our work, that we've sort of got the air cover of this strategy and this document to give what we say a bit more oomph. So thank you.
From a police perspective, we're continually trying to improve the service and the experience for women who report rape and serious sexual offences to us. So at the moment we're bringing in the National Obsteteria model across the force. That's also working with partners to try and really work together and provide that much better rounded experience to support these women when they report these horrific experiences to us. There's a lot of meetings internally within the police to make sure there's governance around investigations, to make sure that those investigations are progressed efficiently and effectively, and that the victims are kept up to date, which is really important because we fully recognise that the judicial process takes a significant amount of time to progress through the different channels, so it is really difficult for those victims to maintain engagement in that process. But it is something that obviously we take really seriously and are constantly trying to improve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think just by way of summary, it's worth saying that our strategy covers a whole range of survivors and victims. So women are by far the most likely to be impacted by this issue, but the men are also victims of domestic and sexual abuse, and our services are commissioned and delivered in a way to be inclusive and allow that support to be accessed by anybody. And obviously our strategy covers support for children as well, who are victims in their own right of domestic abuse. So it covers a whole range of council responsibilities and duties, from housing to safeguarding to care to community safety. So that's why it's a real cross-cutting issue for the council. The final point I would just make, Chair, before you open for questions is the council is also a white ribbon organisation, and it's White Ribbon Day this month. So any councillors who haven't yet got their white ribbon or their lanyard with the white ribbon on, there are some available for you to take before the end of the meeting today to show your support for the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do in the city to support survivors and victims, and thank you for the work that you've done to help shape the strategy that we're here today to consider. You know, we've talked a lot in this committee about the importance of the council really working with voluntary and community partners, statutory partners, other public agencies, to make sure that we're putting in place strategies that are informed by lived experience, recognising that the council alone is not the sole source of knowledge or wisdom in this space. It requires people with lived experience to be able to inform our work. We've talked a lot about doing things with the people and communities of Sheffield, not doing things to. And I think what you've just described is a way in which that is clearly worked here. And so thank you for your involvement in helping us produce the strategy that we've got before us. I will open it up to comments and questions, and if you could perhaps be specific about sort of whether you'd like any member of the colleagues to address your point. So I've got 4 hands so far. I've got Councillor Johnson first, and then I'll go to Councillor Kayoum.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks very much, because the reports here that have being issued publicly show there's a huge amount of work going on there, as the Chair has just said. I just wanted to, I should have said, of course, I've got my white ribbon on my coat, not on me, so maybe I should have taken a lanyard off you. I was just reflecting on what you're saying, because what I think was shocking, or one of the things that's shocking about the reports you put forward, is the sheer numbers of people who are victims and who are perpetrators. And the link with the white ribbon is, you know, I spoke in full council last week, and I was mildly critical of possibly people who are focusing on the really extreme cases. I know that some of you will see the really horrific, brutal cases that don't want describing here, but it's about the scale of the stuff that doesn't always get onto the radar. And from sort of the white ribbon point of view, it's the sheer numbers. It's not the thing that, you know, really extreme people do in other situations. It's stuff that just goes on all the time. And that's, I suppose, was what I want to reflect on there, and why it's so important to just keep on doing all this stuff. I've actually got two specific questions. So, as Chair of Housing, we've actually got a proposal coming to forthcoming committee on adopting a new domestic abuse policy within the housing service. We did that actually as one of the impacts of regulation is that we recognised that we actually didn't have one. And so that was a bit of a surprise to me, because I thought we had. And I said, well, actually, why are we doing just one in housing? Because obviously in council housing, there are issues there as there are in all other tenures. And I said, why don't we just use the council-wide domestic abuse policy? And I realised that we don't have one. So appreciate we've got a strategy there, or action plan. We've got evidently a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So the question is really, do we need a domestic abuse policy for the council as to how we treat people on a council-wide basis? And you say, could the housing one be adopted? Now, the answer to that might be yes or no. And I was just saying, could you take it away and have a think about whether that would be a helpful addition or not? I completely understand that it may be that it's not needed. But in housing, we're proposing to bring one forward, and hopefully that will make it clearer to tenants, what we're saying. The other question I got is, I'm just looking for the page I had a note on. Yeah, it was about funding, because funding is always critical. Can you tell me, it said that in the report, which is now slightly out of date, paragraph 7.5, I think Sam, I'm probably addressing this to you, it says waiting for clarification of the government budget announcement scheduled for 30th October, and should further funding not be made available, this will significantly reduce the amount of funding we have available. What is the situation on that? Are we in a position where the funding's been renewed, or do we actually have a crisis that's impacting on this?
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm going to take a number of questions because there's, I've got 7 members who now want to speak. So I'm going to take 3 and then we'll come back to the panel for any observations, reflections, and then take the remaining 4. Councillor Kayoum, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. It's really a pleasure to read through this in terms of just echoing Councillor Johnson's comments about the huge amount of work that's gone behind the scenes for developing this strategy. There's always been a need, obviously, for various agencies to come together and work in a much more coordinated way. And I see that coordination now being more effective and actually being far more coordination now between various agencies than there has been previously. And that's always been the case. As with my other hat on as a Sheffield magistrate, I've seen the effects of this issue, the domestic violence and the sexual rape, etc., sexual abuse, the effect and the impact that it has not only on the individuals but on whole entire families, affecting women, children, and everyone throughout the family. And of course, it transcends all age groups, genders, and different communities, nationalities. As we know that Sheffield is home to a very diverse range of different communities, and in some of those communities, due to the various cultures that they work in or they live in, sometimes these issues are masked or not entirely apparent or hidden. Now, I know the police service have done a lot of work on sort of trying to weed that out and develop strategies to work with different communities. But I'm just wondering, as part of this strategy, if there's anything specific, any specific piece of work that will be done to ensure that those communities don't get left behind in accessing the services, the wonderful service obviously now you're trying to together and provide, so that we ensure that people, women, men, children from those communities are also able to access the services fully and not get left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've now got 8 members who want to speak, so if I could ask members to be brief in their comments, and I'm going to take 4 and 4. So next we've got Councillor Mohammed, please.
Thank you. I think my question probably was going to be to Sam. Sam, it's section 7.5 in particular. It's the references around the fact that quite a chunk of this money is from government funding. And within that section, you talk about the money lasting till March 2025, and no further announcements have been made by the government on the funding. And clearly without this funding, I think it says in the paragraph, should further funding not be made available, this will significantly reduce the amount of funding available to support the objectives of the new strategy. At this stage, if this was to not continue, are you able to indicate which bits of the strategy will be really affected? I might follow up his answer, Chair, but I'll keep it at that.
Thank you. And then Councillor Belden, please.
Thanks. If I can just echo the thanks to especially all the partners and the officers involved. It was really good to hear about how well co-produced this strategy has been, and the genuine feeling that you've really been involved, and the voice of survivors being strong in it as well. And I think that's a really good model for other strategies. Most of the work that we do these days is in partnership, and if we can use that as a model for how we develop sort of strategies going forward, I think that's a really positive thing. So thank you, and congratulations to Women's Aid on your 50 years this year as well. I wanted to highlight a couple of points around the, we've talked about this being cross-cutting, but I think particularly the link with housing and that's brought out in the report, and around homelessness. I know when we discussed the Homewards programme at a previous S&R meeting, we did discuss reviewing our own homelessness strategy, and we can see so much homelessness is actually driven by domestic violence and domestic abuse. So it's possibly a question for Councillor Johnson if we've made any further progress around reviewing that strategy, and particularly in the light of some of the things in this report as well. And I do think as well, as I say, that it's a really good model. So much of that strategy is produced in partnership as well, and we could probably learn quite a bit from this. And I think my other question is around Homewards itself. I'm not sure that does really have very much emphasis in that programme around domestic abuse and how much it is driving homelessness. And given that the Homewards strategy is very much about getting upstream and preventing homelessness in the first place, is there something we can do around making sure that the learning we've got that's in this report is informing that work as well? And then a couple of questions, which maybe for Alison possibly, or for police, which is just around the work that we're doing with perpetrators. I recognise it's a fairly small portion of the budget, and then it's fairly small numbers of people who are completing some of the training and so on, and I do appreciate how difficult that must be to do. But again, in that spirit of the White Ribbon campaigns, the theme this year is It Starts With Men. How can we do more to engage with perpetrators and make sure that we're doing the work with perpetrators to try and stop these kinds of behaviours happening? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So we'll pause there for the questions and ask the panel to come back and reflect. And if anyone would like to come in, there's obviously some specific ones, but feel free to offer any reflections from across all of the panel.
Okay, if I start, and Alison's been really helpfully writing those questions down for us so we can remember what they are. On the issue of the council-wide policy, I think that's worth us taking back and reflecting on. My initial thought, Councillor, is that it might be really difficult because of such a range of different policy areas that domestic abuse touches on. It might be difficult to have a single policy. I know, for example, our HR service at the moment is looking specifically at a policy around our internal HR process and how we support staff around issues around domestic abuse. you know, very similar issues, but very different kind of policy area than housing, I guess. So, but that's definitely worth us reflecting on. I think maybe if I come back on the funding question as well, because a couple of questions related to that. We didn't have any specific announcement in the October budget about the specific sources of funding. There are a number of sources of funding that fund a bunch of areas, some of which are in my areas of responsibility, where we still, the announcements from budget haven't filtered down to departmental budget announcements yet. We know that I think the timings of the election and the way the budget's happened has made that quite difficult for us as a council, along with every other council in the country around those funding streams. But we are expecting and hoping that an announcement on that will come later this month, if not early December. That does make it very difficult for us to plan ahead, but I think that's partly the nature of the kind of where we've got to in the national budget planning cycle this year. I think if that funding doesn't emerge, we've got some real pressures on our budgets. I mean, that funding doesn't necessarily specifically fund one bit of the overall picture. It's become part of the overall budget we have for domestic abuse services. But, you know, things like refuge provision for young people are all part of that mix. So it would give us a very big headache, and I suppose we're confident that government will want to fund and continue to see those services supported. Maybe I'll bring somebody else in on. Do you want to talk about the DAHA stuff, Alison? You're right.
Yeah, as part of the strategy, I think we've referenced the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation that is being worked towards, and that's what's prompted the housing policy around domestic abuse. So that's a really positive move forward, and we're hoping that is going to be, you know, well, as part of that, there's training going on across housing staff to make sure that everyone's really domestic abuse informed is the language we use now, which is, you know, being able to be really, it's like trauma informed, but on a different level. So it's being able to be really sympathetic and empathetic and compassionate to people approaching the council because of domestic abuse. So that feels like a really positive direction we're going in.
Yes, thank you. In answer to a couple of the questions and to echo Alison, I'm really pleased to see that Council are going through the domestic abuse accreditation, the DAHA accreditation, and again we've been invited to sit on the subgroups and help shape some of that work, which has been really positive, because we know that I think it's always in the top 3 reasons for homelessness. Domestic abuse is, you know, always stubbornly up there as one of the top 3 reasons. So we welcome working in partnership, and also the question around black and minoritized survivors that was asked. Our largest group of survivors that we work with in the refuges, and we deliver our contract in partnership with IDAS, but we specifically deliver the refuges. They are predominantly white women, but easily secondly are the Pakistani and Indian women that we work with. So we do have staff that have community languages, and we do specific therapeutic work there, and we understand about honour-based abuse and violence. But yes, I do recognise your point that actually it's quite hard for those communities to access services, have the confidence to access those services. And what we find is when we're working with our survivors from those particular communities, actually word of mouth is quite successful in terms of how accessible our services are, how well supported they feel, and actually in terms of being able to take that step and reach out and try and access our services. But yes, we do recognise it as a bit of a challenge.
I'd just like to make the case for our specialism, which is sexual violence, and I think quite often sexual violence gets considered a bit of a subset of domestic abuse. It's not. Our client group, although there is a slight overlap, it is quite different. The majority of our clients, whatever gender they are as adults, they are actually survivors of child rape and sexual abuse as well. It might not be what brings them to us, but it's part of their history and part of their story. And I think it was mentioned earlier about the underreporting, those taboos and barriers that really a lot of people face. The underreporting of childhood sexual abuse and adult sexual violence is massive. In our client group, it's roughly about 80–85% would never report to the police. They've never told anyone. They've never told their family. They've never told their friends. They've kept it to themselves, and often we are the first person that they've ever told about us. And this includes clients that we've seen in their 70s and 80s who have never ever spoken about it in decades. So I think those taboos are absolutely something we're focused on. We're trying to build a more diverse workforce, and we've applied for funding outside to lotteries to do more community outreach, because we recognise there are a whole range of issues that stop people reporting. But they really are people across the community, and by not telling what happened to them sometimes and not receiving that early intervention support, it affects their whole lives, their mental health, their physical health, their employability, their family relationships, their social isolation, all of those sorts of things. So we're really keen that we remove those barriers as quickly as possible and let people seek that early intervention and support for what they've experienced. But I just wanted to make the difference. This is what happens in a lot of meetings, that domestic abuse gets all the focus, but our specialism is quite different, although we work very closely with the domestic abuse services as well. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a really important point, and I'm glad you clarified that. Thank you for it.
Sorry, I forgot to add something. So I'd really like to acknowledge that we support a lot of survivors that have no recourse to public funds in our refuges, and we know that they are a really marginalised group of survivors who do often get overlooked. And I would like to acknowledge actually that Sheffield Council are really good at supporting no recourse to public fund survivors. We do have barriers around accessing legal aid solicitors. I think that's a challenge for domestic abuse services nationally, not just ourselves. But the council are incredibly supportive, and I have worked in other areas around the country, and Sheffield is by and large the most positive council that we've worked with around supporting survivors, not only with children around no recourse to public funds, but also single survivors who quite often get overlooked in terms of having support around no recourse to public funds. And we know, again, that specifically affects certain marginalised groups and communities. So I would like to express our thanks for that.
Thank you very much. That's really encouraging to hear. And the point around the difficulty of accessing legal aid services is well made. It's something that I know our MPs have been raising in Parliament, and it's certainly on the agenda for the new government. I've got 5 members who've indicated they want to speak, so if people could keep their comments brief, then we'll get through everybody and give time for the panel to come back and share further reflections. So just for clarity, I've got Councillor Hurst, Councillor Otton, Councillor Miskell, Councillor Argentio and Councillor Naz. And then we'll draw a line and come back to the team. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for bringing this report to us. And thank you for working so hard in turning survivors of abuse into victims of abuse into survivors. I find it hard to congratulate you on your survival for 40 and 50 years, because it's unbelievable, isn't it? And Mira, what you said has kind of like thrown me into a spin, because I was a victim of physical abuse as a child, and you don't report it, you don't tell anybody, because you think that's how people live their lives and you think it's the norm. So thank you for saying that. It needed saying. My question is around the Inspire to Change programme and the education, and how we work together so that, you know, we do live together with mutual respect, and how the cultural or economic imperative, you know, when you're under pressure, isn't simply to abuse someone or to inflict violence on them. It is small. Is it effective? What can we do to support that and grow it? And what can we do to work with schools and establishments where, you know, children can acknowledge that in actual fact what I'm experiencing isn't right, and can give them the strength to grow up mentally well and healthy and capable of living different lives. I think that's really, you know, it's so important that we learn to live together in mutual respect.
Thank you, Councillor Hurst. Councillor Otton, please.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the report. I agree with the comments that have been made. I just wanted to comment briefly on the nighttime economy aspect of this, which much of which comes under Western Street Scene, certainly licensing service and the CCTV and the city centre management. Part of their role is safety, women's safety in the nighttime economy. The Ask for Angela scheme, I know, has come under scrutiny lately in terms of its effectiveness and whether
licensed premises are actually observing it correctly. And we have been, certainly my inbox has been hit with people saying, you know, can you mandate it? Can you require organisations to adopt it and follow it? At the moment, it's not policy, it's not licensing policy that we do that. There is a question mark whether we can do that. But we have agreed, we had a discussion yesterday at licensing steering group, Councillor Karim was there as well. And we have agreed to consult on the question of whether we can mandate Ask for Angela participation from licensed premises, and then obviously we can hold them to that if they fail, or if they fail more generally in their duty to protect their customers. Obviously licences can be reviewed. I would appeal to people to come to licensing if they think the premises is falling short on that, and licences can be reviewed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update, Councillor Austin. Councillor Miskell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome this strategy to end domestic and sexual abuse and violence against women and girls. And I think also it's important to note the particular cross-cutting nature of it and welcome that within this council, but also across third sector organisations that are represented today, like Women's Aid and Sheffield Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre, and of course South Yorkshire Police, who play a really important enforcement part of this. I think, as colleagues have rightly noted, Monday is White Ribbon Day, and we've noted that in full council over the past few weeks. And of course, it's particularly timely to bring this strategy before this committee to adopt on behalf of the city. And I think that's important to say, because this is not simply about adopting it on behalf of this council, it's about the city as a whole, isn't it? And outside this place, I kind of draw on my reflections. I work 2 days a week as a secondary school teacher, and one of the best lessons that I've ever taught over the past few years was on this very issue with a Year 9 class, and it was a lesson where girls in the class for once felt able to share their lived experience, which was genuinely a shock for many of the boys in their class, and it builds on the point that Councillor Hurst was mentioning about the important roles that schools and educational establishments have to play in addressing many of these issues. Those girls shared those lived experiences of many of their peers about harassment on the street or having to take decisions to avoid certain spaces at night. And all of those things are things which limit the choices and curtail freedoms of women and girls, and things that boys in my class found it very difficult to comprehend, but it was important that they heard. And that's why I'm particularly pleased that this strategy covers behaviours from harassment on the street that I mentioned there, that were highlighted by girls that I've taught over the years, to holding perpetrators to account. And that's why I'm really pleased to see that South Yorkshire Police are here today and a really active participant and partner in this strategy. And I know that South Yorkshire's Mayor, Oliver Coppard, who's now taken on oversight of policing, will no doubt be focusing on this issue in detail as part of his new police and crime plan that is in development. So I'm really pleased with this strategy, helping to play our part as a council, but as a city. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming today to bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miskell. Councillor Agencio, please.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it short. First of all, thank you for the report and the strategy, and particularly thanks to all the organisations that have kind of helped shaping it. And it's really good actually to have you here telling us that, because we as members, you know, are working in a completely different way. The council, we're trying to really work with our partners, and it's really kind of good for us to hear the feedback. So thank you for that, and thank you for all your work and people with lived experience that have contributed to it. Thank you, Mira, for also making that very important distinction. I think it's really kind of, we need to make that distinction more often, I think. And thank you so much, Holly, for mentioning no recourse to public funds. We are doing quite a lot of work in the background at the moment on no recourse to public funds, and I think that we need a conversation as a corporate organisation of how we are more consistent, so that all services of the council act in the same way for people who are super marginalised and very vulnerable. So thank you for sticking with it, even when it's really difficult. And I have personal experience from my day job on this. I have a few kind of questions and other points. First of all, also very important to remember that some communities are by a community of interest, or some communities are very distrusting of authority. So, for example, of the police or of the council, because of their kind of historical trauma. Particularly, I'm thinking of refugees, asylum seekers. That's my kind of day job. But also some of our communities in Sheffield that don't trust the police. So for them, it's going to be very, very difficult to report or even acknowledge that is not what's supposed to happen. So I wonder what else we can do in that space. Also, in terms of the training, I'm really, really pleased to hear that the housing staff are getting the training. But I think all, staff that are service, people-facing services should have the training, not just to support the victims, but also to spot the signs. I'm thinking about the repair, people who go into people's house, the care workers. We need to really have that kind of one council approach to this and one city approach to this. So this is how we work in Sheffield. It doesn't matter if it's council, if it's the NHS. I think it's very important that we have that kind of approach. Also, I have one little niggly thing on page 107 is the impact, the EDI report. There is a missing T in LGBT+, and because trans people are also victims and perpetrators of domestic violence and sexual abuse. So why is that T not in there? And finally, a very practical question. I know that we will already have asked the question, I hope, as a council, as commissioners. What are, because it's a very volatile finance, resource area for us as well, we might be in trouble. So have we asked the question, what are the implications of the new national insurance rates on small organisations? Having spent the last week doing the calculations for my own organisation, have we asked the question of what impact that is going to be? Because it's not the national insurance increase that is the problem. The sting in the tail is the raising of the threshold, so lowering the threshold from 9,500 to 5,000 for employers to pay that. And lots of people don't realise how impactful that can be for small organisations that are already kind of struggling to deliver services, especially in the non-profit. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Naz, last but not least.
Thank you. I've just got a comment to make. I'd just like to thank you all for all the hard work that you have done in this area. It's really positive to hear about your experience working with the council. It's great to see VCF and partners working together on these serious issues. I do recognise sexual abuse and domestic abuse is still a taboo subject in many ethnic minority communities, and there are so many cultural barriers that make it harder for women to report this. But last year I did invite DACT officers to community groups to speak to women from South Asian backgrounds to feed into the strategy and to have their lived experience also captured, which was really important. I know there's a lot of work to do in this area, and I'm glad that you guys recognise that. And there is work that's being done to address this. So that's all I like to say, but thank you for all the work that you are doing.
Thank you, and thank you for all of the member contributions today. Some really important points and questions have been raised. In order to maximise time for the panel, I'll hand straight over to the team to respond to the points and questions that were raised.
Thank you, and thanks for those words of support. I think everyone will really appreciate those. To try and, if I miss anything out, please do give me a wave. I think there was a couple of themes about work with perpetrators, which I think it is worth coming back to. And I think the new strategy is majoring quite well and has a separate chapter on working with perpetrators, which sort of builds on the work that we've done in the past. We've got some very specific work that we commission with, which is the Inspire programme, which works with some perpetrators, but the strategy recognises that actually changing attitudes and behaviours is a much wider issue than that. One of the things that we're aiming to do is skill up people who work out in various services who might come into contact with perpetrators. So people who work in drug and alcohol services or in housing or in the criminal justice system will be working with often perpetrators all the time and don't always feel as though they might be they have the skills or it's their responsibility to tackle some of those things when they're working with people. So that's a really important aspect, I think, of the strategy, along with all the things like the white ribbon stuff. And education is a really important factor in that. So the stuff that happens in schools. We had a really good conference last year that the CEO of the White Ribbon organisation came to the town hall, and a load of schools came to an event around that, which was about promoting the White Ribbon campaign and what schools can do to kind of change attitudes and behaviours with particularly with boys, in their school. So there's a load of good work happening that we can try and build on there. I wonder whether colleagues have got a comment about the question about national insurance, because obviously that's going to affect you. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about how that makes sense about that.
About the national insurance, and just quickly about children and young people and about work with the police, if that's okay. DACT have asked us around the impact around national insurance and actually what mitigating factors we may be able to take. You know, we do recognise that the council have budgetary constraints, but you know what I would say is it's incredibly difficult to secure additional funding for small charities at the minute. You know, we are very small. We're only about 16 staff, and I lead on sort of applying for extra bids, and Alison's always really supportive about being a reference for us. We didn't get our Children in Need funding, for example, which we know is really important to support children. And you know, we know that they're recognised under the Domestic Abuse Act, and we do have some support for children in our contract with DACT. But we recognise that, you know, we need more, and we try and get that from other sources of funding, and that's just proving really problematic to receive. And so if we want to get even more funding for those back office costs like national insurance, I'm not hopeful that we're going to be able to secure those from other external grants. It's just really challenging for charities at the minute, and places like the National Lottery are reviewing their strategy and closing applications while they're reviewing their strategy of the direction they want to go in. So I think there's a knock-on our back office, but also some of that additional work we're able to do, particularly in relation to children and young people. But then I'd also like to add, in terms of your question about working with the police, we approached South Yorkshire Police. We worked really positively with them around delivering some training to their officers around understanding coercive control and actually why survivors may not report, and actually how they may present when officers go out. You know, echo mirrors. A lot of our survivors haven't approached police. They don't always have the confidence. They don't always understand maybe the routes that it's going to be safest for them to be able to do that. So we did a really piece of positive work with the police around training their officers in recognising coercive control and the intersecting needs of survivors, and why some particularly may have a real mistrust of contacting the police.
Yeah, I don't want to be full of doom and gloom, because I do think working in the charity sector, you do have to be a natural optimist, otherwise you just shut up shop and go home. But as well as the national insurance impact, which is going to hit us big, there is a massive funding cliff edge for us, which I know is faced by most charities in the sector. So I would say probably about 80% of our funding comes from either the Ministry of Justice through the Rape Support Fund, or through what was the Police and Crime Commissioner, now South Yorkshire Mayor, who are waiting to hear as well from the Ministry of Justice about that funding. Now, our funding from those funds comes to an end at the end of March next year, and we still don't know how much money we're going to get. And with the national insurance, we're sort of thinking they're giving us with one hand if we get it and taking it away with the other. So it is a huge impact. That's just the nature of working in the charity sector. But I think this is the closest to the wire we've ever been, without really getting proper confirmation in black and white that those funds are going to be there. If we don't get that funding, we are really going to have to severely cut back our work. But we've just got to hope that they're not going to suddenly say, oh no, sexual violence is sorted in Sheffield, we don't need to give any money. But that, I mean, that just paints the picture of really what we're all dealing with. National insurance, to be honest, is just a little piece of the patchwork in terms of funding overall. I just wanted to pick up on asylum seekers and extremely traumatised people that are still being re-traumatised in the system here. And I think as a sexual violence specialist service and what we're able to offer at the moment, we are very aware of not doing more harm by opening up the trauma and talking about sexual violence. So that's why it's really important to us to work with partner agencies to make sure some of those people that come to us are supported in Maslow's hierarchy of need, that their basic needs are being met before they come to us as a specialist sexual violence service, and then we're able to help them deal with the sexual trauma that they've experienced.
Great. Thank you all very much. Look, it's been a really rich conversation today, and we've got a huge amount of important points, and thank you everyone for your contributions. I think we all recognise the very tight funding landscape that you're all working in right now, as are we. But I think perhaps after this meeting we take this conversation offline and work out what we can do to help have conversations to try to alleviate the pressure that you're under right now. But I think on behalf of the committee, just thank you all for coming today, being part of this work. Thank you for the ongoing work that you do to support some of the most vulnerable, traumatised people in our city, and we will continue to work with you. So we've got a number of recommendations, colleagues, before us today. That this committee is recommended to accept and note the contents of the annual report of the work of the Domestic and Sexual Abuse Strategic Board, that we agree the contents of the new strategy called From Surviving to Safety, and that we commit the Council to continue to play a leading role working with a wide range of external stakeholders in delivering the aims and the objectives of the new strategy in the coming years ahead. Are colleagues happy to support those recommendations? Great. Okay, thank you. That's a really important step forward. Thank you all for coming today. Right. Thank you. So, agenda item number 10 is an update report around the city goals and Sheffield Stronger Together. And we're being joined by James and Laura. Perhaps for the benefit of everyone here and watching online, maybe you could just introduce yourselves and then briefly introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, James Anderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Hi, I'm Laura Reynolds. I'm a Business Change Manager currently working on City Goals.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll introduce the report briefly and I'll ask Laura to add anything that I might miss. So the purpose of the report that's before the committee today is to provide you with an update on the work that's been undertaken following the agreement of the Sheffield City Goals earlier in the year. And secondly, to provide the committee with an overview of the new Sheffield Stronger Together leadership arrangements which have been put in place. Members of the committee will recall that partners in the city came together to identify the need for a long-term set of ambitions that the city as a whole, rather than any one partner or group of partners, could achieve. And that developed into the City Goals programme, and those goals were developed over the course of 2023, following a very detailed process of evidence gathering and co-design with communities and organisations from right across the city. And those goals were considered by this committee back in January and were agreed by the City Partnership Board as it was in February 2024. And they've subsequently been endorsed by many organisations across the city, both large and small. So the report sets out effectively what's happened since then. There has been a transition team that has been in place, led by Angela Fowkes from the Sheffield College, and that transition team has been composed of partners from across the city, and they've shepherded the work needed to create the conditions for the goals to be realised, reflecting the fact that much of the necessary infrastructure in place, much of the necessary infrastructure to enable the city to take them forward either wasn't in place or wasn't perhaps fit for the new challenge of the city goals. I think it's really important to emphasise that that work has not been led by Sheffield City Council. It has been a cross-city, cross-partner approach in keeping really with the ethos behind the city goals, with a range of people volunteering their time to lead and support that work. And one of the recommendations is to recognise and to thank the transition team for their work. They've identified 5 core work streams which are set out in the paper. I won't go through those, but the 5th work stream, known as Sheffield Stronger Together, consists of 3 elements: voice and engagement, establishment of a leadership group for the city, and developing a coordinating and enabling function to support the longer-term delivery of the goals. The focus has been on the 2nd of those 3 at the moment, and a new leadership group has been established. That met for the first time earlier this month, chaired by Councillor Hunt, and that Councillor Mohammed and Councillor Johnson are also members of. And the purpose of that group really is to act as stewards of the goals by convening a system which supports Sheffield to collaborate, coordinate and mobilise more effectively. And it will allow different sectors and partners to come together in different ways to solve complex challenges and to identify new opportunities for the city. It includes the leaders of the city's key institutions, so large organisations such as the Teaching Hospital, the Vice-Chancellors of the 2 universities, as well as members from the private sector and the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sector. And there will be a transparent and open process to recruit additional members on a fixed-term basis. The report also sets out the next steps. So one of the things that we know needs to happen is to develop a forward plan for that leadership group for the next 6 months, as well as taking forward the development of the other work streams that are set out in the report. And there is some specialist expertise that has been brought on board to support us with that process and support the leadership group with that process. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions. But before I do, Laura, is there anything that you want to add that I have missed?
No, thank you, James. That's great. I'd just like to thank the transition team for their support in the work. It's been great to get us to this stage. I'm looking forward to moving forward.
Thank you both very much. And yeah, I'd just like to also place on record my thanks to the transition team for their work to get us to this point. Right, we can open it up for any questions and comments. If anyone over here wants to ask a question, I may have to struggle to see you. This job's about trade-offs. I can't see, but it's warmer. So are there any comments? No. Any questions? Okay, well, I think this work is about the city stepping forward and having a long-term sort of set of goals for our future. They're bigger than the City Council, and as the leadership group description outlines, includes partners from a wide range of organisations, including the private sector, who are going to be key to this. And that leadership group, which Councillor Johnson, Councillor Mohammed and the Chief Executive are part of, is about providing a kind of steering role for the overseeing the goals, but crucially not to be in charge of doing everything to contribute to the goals being achieved. That is the job of a wide range of organisations, and in different ways we're now seeing organisations, groups in the city adopt the goals, use them to shape their own strategic plans, and in the same way that we have done with our council plan. So this is a positive step forward, and there's still no comments or questions, in which case I'll move straight to the recommendations. That we note the progress being made, we record and recognise the contribution of the citywide transition team, and place on record our thanks to the chair, Angela Foulkes, and members of the team for their work, and that we acknowledge their work in developing the Sheffield Stronger Together work stream. Are people happy with that? Great, thank you all very much indeed. So, thank you to James and to Laura. Item number 11 is about delivering future Sheffield, which is something that we've considered here at this committee before in earlier stages, and now very much in the delivery phase. So, being joined by Tom, Catherine and Claire. For the benefit of everyone in the room and online, perhaps you can just introduce yourselves briefly and then introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Smith, Director of Customer Experience and Communities.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Catherine Mills. I'm the Assistant Director of Transformation.
Hi there, Claire Taylor, Chief Operating Officer.
So, the purpose of this report this morning is to give the committee an overview of the progress to date on the immediate priority areas agreed at the last committee on the 24th of July, and this includes the next steps of the Customer Experience Programme in the paper. So the paper we have given you this morning is quite a long and detailed paper, but it demonstrates the complexities of an organisational transformation programme. So the paper gives an outline of an update on the live programmes and sets out the proposed new programmes that are required to create the medium-term transformational programme required to align the organisation to the target operating model that was approved by this committee in July. As part of the report, we've included 3 detailed appendices, and these provide further information on the timeframe, the size of the approximate savings, and the next stages in the customer experience programme, with the pipeline of digital activity that's needed to support the delivery of the customer experience programme. As part of this paper, we have included the progress report of the Customer Experience Programme, which again we agreed to present at this committee following the last update in July. And I'd like to hand over to Tom Smith to do this update.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'll be relatively brief, but just to give you a bit of a potted view of what we've been doing over the last 12 months or so in terms of Customer Experience Programme, and a bit of an update on some of the work as we go forward. So first thing probably to say is I've been at this committee lots of times. I introduced myself lots of times, but you will have noted my change in job title. That is a step forward in terms of the programme. I've now got responsibility for customer experience and communities, and clearly at the last Strategy and Resources Committee we talked about a community strategy going forward in the customer experience work, and those two things knitted together as a piece of really big coherent work for the council will be hugely important in terms of our ongoing transformation. So I'm genuinely proud to be in the role, but it's a kind of a commitment of this council that the role exists in the first place. Lots of practical work been taking place. So been doing a huge amount of work with the digital programme. So again, we've got a digital strategy for the council, and we've been starting to look at the first changes around accessibility and navigation in terms of the council's website. In particular, big improvements around taxi licensing and working with the trade a lot on that in terms of applications and processes, and work around housing rents and the focus on that in terms of being able to check your rent and other things. Been doing some work around Copilot and artificial intelligence, which is frankly amazing, astonishing piece of kit really, but we're starting to look at how we might use that for some simple customer operations, how we really genuinely start to use that in a safe way and in line with how we want to use it as a council, but really to give genuine benefit in terms of how we deal with customers. A lot of work within our contact centre, so we've had people in, we're doing a lot of developmental work with contact centre staff. Lots of work on engaging with the teams to talk to them about how we get better actually in that contact centre, to get ourselves in the best shape for the future, because the future is about bringing more services into the contact centre centrally to get real efficiency about how we're doing transactional contact as a council. Some work around some customer journeys. So we picked some very specific customer journeys to focus on initially, to test out some approaches so that we can take that learning into the future development programme. So I've been doing work on housing rent, as I said before, some work in terms of supporting vulnerable adults, school admissions, and some work on supporting businesses in the private sector as well. So a cross-section that enables us to learn and take the learning from that into the wider transformation programme, so that's been delivered. Looking at things like our face-to-face, we've done a review of all of our locations, we've had a look at what we've currently got, and so we have a really good understanding of where our face-to-face offer is, so again we can start to do that development work, get a much more consistent face-to-face offer for customers, and again just use our resources and our buildings and what we've got from a resource perspective in the council and outside of the council into the voluntary community sector and others to deliver a really good face-to-face offer as we go forward. So they're the kind of key things I'd pick out, Chair, and I'll hand back to Catherine.
Thanks, Tom. So what we're starting to see now through this report is that we're moving from strategy into delivery. So I'd like to highlight the 4 recommendations of this paper. And the first is that to note the progress that we are making through the transformation programme, and that through this work we have now started to identify what the potential financial and wider benefits will be from doing this work. The second recommendation is to note the next steps for the customer experience programme and agreeing that further development and delivery of the customer model and the leadership for this function. The third recommendation is about noting the proposed activity and the investment required to deliver the transformation programme over the next 2 to 3 years, and to note that to do this work we would like to progress to identify strategic partners to support delivery. To support the last two recommendations, in Appendix A, we have produced a high-level roadmap which details the work that we will need to do over the next 2 years and the size of potential savings. We recognise that transforming an organisation of our size and complexity at pace will require investment in areas such as technology and automation, and working with a strategic partner will enable us to utilise high-level expertise in these areas and support us with the system change required to deliver the target operating model and drive out the benefits identified in this report.
Thank you very much. Claire, was there anything you wanted to add? No. Okay.
No, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. And Tom, welcome to your new role. And in many ways, I think the three of you being in your roles is a commitment to, is testament to this organisation's commitment to the Future Sheffield programme and to modernising and transforming the organisation to be the best council it can be for the people of the city. So I've seen a number of members indicate. I've got Councillor Argencio, followed by Councillor Dale.
Thank you, and thank you so much for all the work that has already happened. I mean, it's so good to finally get to the point where something is happening, because, as you know, because I am on the working group, you know, from the moment I was elected, I was like really horrified by how difficult it was to get in touch with the council. And I've drilled basically officers for, not always pleasantly, since May 2019. So it's really good to know that we're working on our website, the customer experience, the customer service, telephone lines, etc. Tom, you talked about accessibility. For me, and I've asked this question in some of the meetings we've had. For me, accessibility is about anybody, whatever their ability, disability is. And I wonder whether you could tell us what interactions we've had to build a new website and the phone lines, etc. We've had with people with sensory impairment, for the website for visually impaired people in particular, because it's something I've been going on since 2019, and how our website is not made for people with visual impairment because it can't be read. And also BSL signers, because lots of people assume that you just put subtitles onto something or they can read, but BSL is a different language, so English is a second language, and sometimes they don't even read English. So what engagement have we had with those communities? And also, of course, people with learning disabilities. So how are we providing that customer experience to someone who has a learning disability? And the reason why I'm asking this is because we're doing some work in my committee, Adult Health and Social Care, where we are thinking ahead of the curve, and I have suggested that those officers get in touch with you so that we put those changes into the work at the start, not as an add-on later, because one is more expensive, two is not going to be as effective. So I may just do some email introductions as well, but I would like to know whether these things have been taken into account already. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I've got three more members, so I propose to take them. I've got Councillor Dale, Councillor Smith, Councillor Belbin. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? No, in which case, take those three. Thank you. Councillor Dale, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. Obviously, I'm going to speak on behalf of the Children's Directorate, and we've got significant transformation happening over in Children's, not just on these issues, but I think, as many members in this chamber will know, you've put in here school admissions, and at certain times a year we get quite a bit of casework with regards to that. But I think it's deeper than that. We've also need to be looking at, and I know that officers in Children's Directorate are doing this, and I'm hoping that the dialogue is crossing over. around the work we do around the SARS work as well, and complaints around that, and how are we going to streamline that in this directorate? My concern is, if we're going to be, it's quite a special skill and a special understanding in that area when we're looking at EHCP plans for children, the right kind of schools for children, special needs places. If we're talking about streamlining things, I'm concerned that it's going to be put in a generic place where there may be people who have not got that skill set. Because when parents come to us, they're already at their wits' end when it comes to dealing with these situations, and I would like this to be easier for families to be able to navigate, rather than coming across a barrier where we've got maybe agents on a call that don't understand that area. And with regards to that, what would we be doing with around parent voice at this, and gathering an understanding of a family's lived experience from our current processes, and what would improve that for them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for a really impressive report. Forgive a former project and programme manager, but I really liked it. Couple of questions on Appendix A. Two things that jumped out at me. Slide 8, which is page 160, the biggest anticipated saving is 40 million pounds a year in strategic alignment. Can you give us any more information on what issues you've identified in terms of lack of alignment, or what does it mean? Because that's a massive amount of money, particularly when you talk about the budget pressures that we're looking at the moment. That really jumps out of the page. And the other one, if you look at slide 7, you've got a very large number of work streams going on in parallel. So I'm just wondering if you could give us a flavour of the biggest risks you see of delivering things like 40 million quid a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Belbin, please.
Thank you, and it's good to hear positive feedback from Councillor Smith there, given your own experience on this. I really wanted to come in to make the case, which was related to that point, I think, to make the case around the investment that you talked around with a strategic partner. I think it's really clear. It's fantastic that we've got to this phase with the work, that we are moving into the delivery phase. We've discussed the work on a number of occasions, and particularly around customer experience and digital transformation. But I think the kind of bigger project has perhaps felt not as clear when we were going to, that will start making a real difference to people. So hearing that we are at this stage where some of the changes will be going live is fantastic. But as Councillor Smith said, there are a lot of work streams and so on, and I know the team are really at maximum capacity at the moment in planning all that work. So having that strategic partner availability to support work to ensure that we are managing risk and so on feels like a really key ask to me that we need to take at this committee. And I know we have been working with a range of partners in the around the initial phases of this work, but actually having one strategic partner who's really clued into everything that we're doing around the work feels like an essential part of it to me. So I just wanted to really come in support of that recommendation.
Thank you very much. So a couple of more specific questions, one from Councillor Argentio and Dale, and then more sort of programmatic-wide questions as well from Councillor Smith, Councillor Belbin. So I'll hand back to the panel to share reflections and provide answers on those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start, and then I'll hand over to a couple of colleagues if that's okay. So, Councillor Argentio, all really good points. I can't speak to the digital stuff in terms of engagement because it's been very much delivered through our IT people in conjunction with the customer people. I think that the general point, though, about our engagement into communities, and when I talk about communities, I don't necessarily mean geography. I mean, communities of people and the diversity of the city generally. This, for me, is where the community strategy and the customer strategy become one thing to some extent in terms of ensuring that whatever we're doing from a transformation piece within customer, we're genuinely reflecting the needs and the wants of our communities broadly in place. So, my commitment as we work through this is to get engaged with the people we need to get engaged with around, learning disabilities, other disability, and all the diversity in communities that we have within the city. This is customer experience and Future Sheffield is designed as a council piece of work, as a cross-council piece of work. So you put it around engagement into adult social care, colleagues in that directorate and other directorates is a really good one, but my hope, and I am relatively confident at this stage, is that because this is a cross-council piece of work and because my role in this is now a cross-council role, we will be able to do that engagement across into all the directorates. And I've been within SLB and very senior colleagues and officers in the council to have these conversations in the run-up to all this work. The pieces of work we've currently identified and the 4 things I talked about, and this is probably just talking to Councillor Dale's question actually, is that they were test cases, and we deliberately picked some things that we thought were useful to focus on, but were relatively at the simpler end, I suppose, of some of what we need to do, because what we wanted to do is test some approach to then allow us to get into the larger transformation work. So, totally agree, Councillor Dale, there's a lot more complexity within children's services necessarily than just school admissions, and we need to start having those conversations into children's around how we're going to do that and how we link in with families and get, lived experience and all that sort of thing into that process. I'll bring Meredith in a sec, but just the final thing I would just say on that particular question is that the main aim of the contact centre that we look at the moment is about centralising transactional contact, not about centralising complex contact. So the reassurance, hopefully, is that we are, we will be drawing the line at a point that means that, that limits what we feel we can do in that transactional contact centre setting, but hopefully make it easier to get from the transactional to the complex than it currently is, because sometimes it's hard to get to the complexity. I'll bring Meredith with me, if that's okay, Chair.
So, and the work that's taking place in children's services around transformation is absolutely plugged into Future Sheffield, and it needs to relate directly with what's happening across the entire council, otherwise it won't work. That complexity, actually we need to unpick that. We need to understand what is the positive impact, because quite often those parents are not just concerned about SEND cells, they're concerned about a range of other issues. So how are we making sure that it's easier and simpler for the people that we serve? And so that's fundamental in everything that we're doing around transformation in children's services, is how we're plugging it in and ensuring that we're one council and have a one council approach for our people.
Thank you very much. So, to come to perhaps Councillor Smith, Councillor Belwin's points, back to Catherine and Claire.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Smith, in terms of the 40 million in strategic alignment, what some of our consultant partners have found is that we have a number of services where we are outliers compared to comparators, councils that comparators to us. And some of this work has also been done through working with finance colleagues about how we move to priority-based budgeting. So we have a number of issues where we need to unpick further. Now, what we don't know is why we're outliers with some of this. We may, through some of this work, decide that in terms of it meeting our strategic outcomes and priorities, we continue to be outliers because actually that's what's right for Sheffield. But at the moment, we are not doing that in a conscious or an informed way. We are just, so we need to have a look at that. But we do feel that there are a number of areas where perhaps we actually do need to take another look and go, does this meet our strategic alignment? Does this meet our outcomes that we've identified in the council plan? And if they don't, then we get the information and intelligence and bring it back to yourselves as, to say direction of where we go with these. And you're right, the work streams, there is a lot. And what we need to do is also work through the prioritisation. So we are looking at the dependencies of the different work streams. So are there some that we decide to move faster on at pace, because actually by doing that, that enables us to move other work streams on at different rates. We're also very conscious that this also aligns with the role review, and so we are working with colleagues in those areas to ensure that when we look at what programmes we go forward, what are the pinch points, what else is happening around the council. We are doing that through strengthening our transformation office, which is a programme management function. So we have a really clear governance now for our projects and programmes, which enables us then to really look at the risks, to make informed choices with our work streams. So our next piece of work following this is to do that prioritisation of the work streams going forward. And then in terms of the strategic partnership, this is why we need also to bring in some of those extra capacity that we do need. You're right, Councillor Belbin, that my team are now at capacity for Future Sheffield. When we've done that prioritisation work, if we decide that there's a number of work streams we really want to accelerate on, we probably will need to bring in some further expertise and capacity to do that. Working with a strategic partner not only gives us the stability and consistency of working with a partner, it gives us the option to scale up and down as according to need and to bring in the relevant expertise quickly and to work on dedicated pieces of work which we then can give back, and it just enables us to really be able to work intelligently in this space over the next 2 years. I haven't got much more to add than my two colleagues, just a couple of reflections, if I may. I think the biggest risks associated with this project are its interdependencies and its ambition. And colleagues have set out essentially working with experts and additional capacity to bring in to mitigate is that approach. I think for me, one of the things that's really important about this programme is also investing in our workforce at the same time. So thinking about things like the digital strategy, we're already starting to support colleagues in terms of data apprenticeships and such like to help build those skills within the organisation. I'd also just wanted to make a point back to the equalities objectives actually that were agreed by the council last year, and built into our quality strategy are three kind of pillars that we've committed to. So we've committed to being a community leader and an effective partner in the space of equalities. We've committed to investing in our workforce and supporting workforce inclusion in that space. But we've also committed to being really good at accessible, inclusive, high quality service delivery. And that's sometimes the bit from the equalities and inclusion objectives that gets lost. And what I wanted to do was just draw a parallel into Tom's work, where he's actually thinking about the voice of the customer. That's really new for this organisation, and it does demonstrate how we're trying to embed Future Sheffield into the way we think about our values, so people at the heart of what we do. Building that real understanding about customers' needs and expectations, whatever their need, whatever their protected characteristic, whatever their lived experience, means that actually Tom's team will start to become an advocate into the organisation so we can get some of our systems and processes right. That includes much better user engagement on things like digital solutions, and that includes our website, but our process design. We do some of that at the moment, but not enough, and that's part of our work. And actually, when we present to members the look and feel of the new website, we'll talk a little bit more about that in some detail. So I just wanted to link into some of the other pieces of work that are really essential to that. And you'll remember the last committee you commissioned a community strategy piece of work. Again, that is really about enhancing that engagement. And finally, Catherine has made a really strong point around the strategic alignment. That's difficult. So essentially what we're saying is we're higher spend in some areas that might not be priority spend. We might want to work with the community voluntary sector commissioning slightly different solutions, and those conversations will come to members for decision making as well. So this is an ongoing programme, which is why it spans the medium term. And my final reflection is how important it is to our medium-term financial strategy. So for everyone that was at Finance and Performance Committee yesterday, you can see our narrative around our medium-term financial plan and our solutions do require us to invest in Future Sheffield. So drawing the parallels of those two things together is really important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Hopefully people can start to see all of connections between their own committee's work and Future Sheffield, and as we step through this week by week, those links will be further enhanced every time. I think, Kate, you wanted to come in to build on that.
Thanks, and apologies, I'm now also being blinded by sunlight, warming sunlight. It was just to say, again, a sort of overarching thread, building on everything that colleagues have said, linking actually, I think, all of the questions that were raised by members, and to just provide some reassurance that obviously you've got the majority of the council's senior officer leadership team here today, but this is one programme for the entire council. There are no other transformation programmes happening in different. Everything that we are doing is aligned together, and that means that we are having sometimes difficult conversations and bringing trade-offs to the fore, but that is the job we have. And I think that is where actually some of the strategic alignment discussions are different perhaps to the way we might have worked in the past, where we are trying to take a whole council look, an outcomes-based look linked to our strategic plan, our council plan, and making sure that we're not thinking only through the lens of directorates or particular linear statutory responsibilities. So I just want to reinforce that point and reassure you that across all committees, I certainly expect and know that my colleagues in SLT are absolutely committed to this programme as the way we are going to deliver for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that point around strategic alignment is well made. You can only do strategic alignment if you have a clear sense of a strategy. And this council, this committee, gave the organisation that kind of plan for the next 4 years with our council plan, which we agreed earlier this year. So, Catherine helpfully noted some of the recommendations earlier on. They are to note the progress of the Future Sheffield Transformation Programme, note the intended next steps for the Customer Experience Programme, and to agree for the development and delivery of the customer model, to note the proposed activity and investment required to deliver Future Sheffield, and to note that following the implementation of the work, this will progress to identify a strategic partner to support delivery. Our colleagues happy to support those recommendations. Great, thank you all very much. So, item 12, and our final report for today is the annual Ombudsman report. And to introduce this report, this item on our agenda, Councillor Belwyn, as the lead member for customer experience, which you'll remember was something we agreed earlier this year, I think, or possibly at the end of last year, is just going to briefly introduce the item before handing over to colleagues to then say a little bit more in detail about the report. Councillor Belwyn.
Thank you. And probably the first thing to say is there's obviously a really strong link with the previous item, symbolised somewhat by the fact that Tom is still sitting there. Obviously the work that we're doing around customer experience and transforming that experience is very, very relevant to how we're managing complaints, how we deal with complaints, and the journey we're on to make sure that as we receive complaints, that we're really using them to change that customer experience, to improve that customer experience, and really learning from them. I think the star headline today, I think, talks about a reduction in complaints coming to the council, which, while it's good, the numbers aren't the whole story when it comes to looking at complaints. It's not about whether we've got fewer year on year. That's not really the measure of progress, I think, because there's all sorts of reasons influencing, whether we're actually recognising things as complaints when they come in, whether people are able to make complaints easily when they need to. The key factors around this are really how much we are learning from them and whether we are really acknowledging the issues at the heart of them and making changes in response, whether that's staff training or making changes to processes, and I know Colleen will go into some of the improvements that we've made as a council. I think it's worth noting, particularly from the Ombudsman letters that we've received, we are pretty much on a par with other core cities in terms of how well we are handling things. The things that have been escalated up to the Ombudsman, there's always room for improvement, of course, but we do align pretty much with our core cities. And I think it's also important to recognise that, we're very open to this process. We've chosen to adopt the Ombudsman Code of Practice ahead of the time that we actually have to do this, which I think shows how committed we are as a council to really engaging with this work. And I really want to thank Tom, Colleen and your team for the fantastic work you're doing around it. I know a lot of that work has involved working with managers of services to ensure they are really taking ownership of the complaints that come into their services and are really using them to make improvements. So I will hand over to Colleen, who will give you some more of the detail on that, but thank you very much for all the work you're doing.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report, as Fran has just mentioned, is really to explain how Sheffield City Council has performed against the required standards and includes examples of services how the services have learned from complaints received, which is arguably the most important aspect of complaints process. As mentioned, we were here in July with the annual complaints report, and we promised to return once we received the annual letters from the Ombudsman. That includes the Housing Ombudsman Service and the Local Government and Social Care and Ombudsman Service, which we have now received. It's in Appendix 1. Appendix 1 is the main report, and there are subsequent appendices to that report. C and D particularly detail the letters from both ombudsmen. So at this point, I'll just take you through some of the highlights without going through all of it, just the things that I think are the positives and perhaps the areas for improvement. The main thing just before I start is to just build on the fact that we are so linked within the complaints area to the Future Sheffield and the customer experience. And the adoption of the new code has brought with it the support of Fran as the member responsible for complaints and Tom as the director responsible for the oversight of complaints, to ensure that complaints, especially from the Ombudsman, are reviewed periodically and we learn from them as we embed a listening culture and hold managers accountable and encourage learning from complaints. So if I just go through Appendix 1 and its highlights, particularly if we go through Section 4, from Section 4 it gives you the data. Just to put that in context, the first point is that the LGSO received 148 complaints and inquiries about Sheffield City Council and its strategic delivery partners. Just to put in context, we did actually receive 8,634 complaints in 23-24, so that 148 represents 1.7% of our complaints. For the Housing Ombudsman, we calculated a number of 44 complaints that the Housing Ombudsman reviewed during that financial year. And of those, 82% were concluded without needing a formal investigation. However, the services that generated the largest number of Ombudsman inquiries and referrals during 23-24 were repairs and maintenance, which was 27%, housing services 16%, and adult social care 10%. And of the 26 complaints that were formally investigated, the highest numbers were education and skills and adult social care. As regards response timescales, preliminary inquiries were just outside of target of 5 working days, coming down to 8 calendar days. And initial formal inquiries were 30 calendar days against the target of 21 working days, but 93% met original target deadlines. The highlights from the LGSCO outcomes are as follows. 83% of complaints were formally investigated were upheld, and that compares with similar councils' average of 80%, so we're just a little bit above that. However, they upheld 20 decisions, and that represents 3.5 decisions per 100,000 residents. That's how they calculate it. But we were just below the national average, which is 4.4. Of those cases, 100% of them had successfully been implemented, the Ombudsman's recommendations, compared with 99% for similar authorities. And 25% of these upheld cases provided a satisfactory remedy before the complaint reached the Ombudsman. However, as I mentioned, adult social care accounted for 30% of the complaints upheld by LGSCO and SENDARS for 25%. However, there were no public reports issued by the LGSCO during 23 and 24. Moving on to the Housing Ombudsman outcomes, the highlights there were that they looked at 7 cases. Now, Housing Ombudsman look at housing and repairs complaints, and it is worth noting that in that financial year, Sheffield City Council dealt with just over 4,000 complaints. So 7 represents 0.14% of our total numbers. However, they did find maladministration and service area findings for some of these. Overall, our maladministration rate was 89%, that's 17 out of the 20 findings, and this compared with 73% for other local similar authorities. In Appendix A, Table 5, it gives breakdown of these, and also in Appendix B. It is worth noting that complaint handling poor performance represents the majority of these failures, and that's 9 out of the 20. And that includes delays in responding to complaints, shortcomings in response letters, and errors in the calculation and payment of compensation. So if we were to remedy that, and that is within our gift, and we are working hard to improve, that would take our maladministration rate down to only 42%. There was one complaint handling failure order, and this was categorised under the description of unreasonable delay in accepting and progressing a complaint through the process. And finally, in total, the council paid out £25,169.85 in compensatory payments and other refurbishments following the Ombudsman's enquiries. And this compares to just over 45,000 in the previous year and 8,000 the year before that. So in summary, I know that's a lot of numbers, forgive me, but in summary, of concern to us at this point is the level of our maladministration rate, but we do have it within our gift to reduce that, and we are working with services to ensure that that happens. And also on a positive note, we have had no public reports issued by the LGSCO. Without going through any further details, in Section 7 it does summarise the benchmarking against similar authorities, which you can see there. And in learnings are identified in Section 8, giving some detailed views of how we've improved and learnt from our complaints. Section 9 also includes our improvement plan, which has been outlined in our Complaint Service Improvement Plan for 2024 to 2026. And in Section 9, I've just highlighted some bullet points, breaking it down into a corporate function, others, and particularly about housing and repairs, because we're aware that that's something that's close to the heart of our residents. So we've taken some big strides to improve the customer experience upstream as part of the Future Sheffield and Customer Experience programme that hopefully will improve the number of complaints we get and the way we manage and handle complaints. So we will continue to rely on the support of the customer experience strategy and the associated programme of change that will continue to provide the driver for change, ensuring that customers are at the heart of what we do and that we respond positively to the learning and insight gained from the feedback provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really important report for us to all be aware of and to give visibility here at SNR. Councillor Agenza and I used to receive reports from you on the Audit Standards Committee, and I think it's really important that they're now coming to this committee in order to make sure that everyone has got full awareness of the work that's going on. I'd like to pay tribute to you and the team for that improvement journey, and thank you for drawing the links between this and the previous agenda item, because they are two sides of the same coin, and it's really important that we all see it in that way. So I've got Councillor Johnson who's indicated he wants to come in. Can I just see if anyone else would like to come in? And Councillor Crossland. Right, let's take those two. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, first of all. And I think, as the Chair said, really links with the previous item. It's simply about getting things right. And I mean, I didn't speak on the last item, but there's just a huge amount of really diligent work there in thinking through every step of what we do as a council. So that's really welcome. I was just wanting to sort of chip something in about the relation to the Housing Ombudsman, because it's no surprise as Chair of Housing, the committee's been looking a lot at repairs. Tom Smith, in your previous role, you were instrumental in turning that round, and it's, I think, really significant you have transferred to this current role. What people might find of interest, Councillor Belby and I had a trip to the Housing Ombudsman's Conference in Manchester recently, and I think what was really interesting there is the Housing Ombudsman has turned around a bit and has really got their teeth into reacting to tenants, getting a grip of things, and frankly being more effective than they used to be. So from the tenant's point of view, frankly, they were particularly helpful. So the point is that in the context here, where we, on the Housing Ombudsman, actually seen a substantial decrease in the number of complaints going through to the Ombudsman, but the point of interest is that that's in the context of the Ombudsman really increasing its rates overall. So I've just got to note, they've nearly doubled their findings of maladministration, you know, for all the housing bodies across the country. And I think they've quoted a 329% increase in the remedies that they've required landlords to take. So in that context, you would expect the number of our complaints, adverse complaints, to be going up, but the fact that they're coming down is actually really significant, I think, and I think does suggest that the work that's being done is showing off some proof of results. So that's actually very encouraging. Not suggesting we should ever be at all complacent about this, but it is an indication things are going in the right direction. So thanks to both of you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, I think on housing, the points you made, you know, noted, and on repairs, clearly a lot of work is underway to improve the service, but there's clearly a lot more to do and on that transformation journey. Councillor Crossland.
Thank you, Chair. There are some highlights in this report, but I would like to focus on housing repairs in particular, because the report does show that the compensation claims have increased fivefold over the last year. So while the numbers of complaints might have decreased, the compensation claims have actually increased. And I suppose that the best way of dealing with complaints is fixing repairs to begin with and not having complaints in the first place. So a bit of background, 2 years ago, £5 million was cut from the repairs budget despite a backlog of around 6,000 repairs at the time. I think the backlog is pretty similar to where it was 2 years ago. There has been no progress made on it. With compensation claims increasing, is it about time that we finally admit that that was a mistake and that our repairs system is failing?
Okay, I'm not sure who that question is addressed to, but perhaps, okay, I don't know if you want to comment on the points you want to make, and then I'll let Councillor Johnson come in if he wants to, but briefly.
Chair, I'll just briefly comment on that, and I think this is where there is clearly a link between complaints and the overall customer experience programme. What the conversation we previously had around Future Sheffield in terms of taking the learning from what we see from our customers and our communities and the engagement with people and changing the way we deliver services to deliver them better is really key to this, especially in terms of the things that end up with the Ombudsman. I think reassuring within here is that we are taking the learning and we are delivering the actions that the Ombudsman is asking us to deliver once we have had those complaints and once we've had those judgments. And I think the other reassuring part of this is that it's reassuring and not reassuring at the same time, being honest about it, which is that a large proportion of what we get through the Ombudsman is about our timeliness in responding to the original complaint, not necessarily about not resolving the problem that is in front of us in terms of the customer. So there's clearly some things we need to do to improve that situation, but a large proportion of this, I think, as other councillors have said, is about the service delivery in the first place, genuinely reflecting the needs of our customers and being responsive and being able to deliver in the right way for people. I think the one thing I would just say about the compensation figures, and just really briefly to reflect, is that the figure from 2 years ago is obviously a kind of a post-COVID figure, so you would expect that that number would be significantly lower than previously. And actually the last year's compensation figure is significantly lower than the previous year's, I think has come down by half. So we are seeing a good direction of travel in terms of compensation, but clearly not complacent in terms of that. We know there is improvement still to be done in terms of housing repairs, and that's been well talked about in Housing Committee and other forums as well.
Thank you. Briefly, if you want to come back.
Yeah, yes, briefly. On the claims that the repair service is failing and that things are just as bad as they always were. I mean, I just want to point out that factually that's not correct. I know the political point that's being made there, but the figures do speak for themselves. There is monitoring of this, and I think, to be fair, also as councillors, we have a role to play in those. possibly as councillors, we see, you know, a lot of the worst instances because, I mean, you know, I'm not alone. We all deal with quite large amounts of casework where, you know, we actually do, of course, see some of those horror stories. But, of course, we've all got a role in putting those through to the right people, trying to get things done. And, you know, I'm sure everyone in here does that. But I just want to point out, yeah, the figures do show that the ship is being turned round, if you like. And whilst I say there is still a long way to go, and as I said before, there's certainly no room to be complacent. I don't want us to get stuck into this idea of bashing public services, criticising our staff, when actually there are improvements in what people are doing.
Thanks. Yeah, certainly work to do, but noted. Thank you very much. So, recommendations are before us, that we're asked to note the annual Ombudsman report and, crucially, the learnings and the service improvements that have resulted from the Ombudsman investigations, that we continue to support the 24 to 26 Complaint Service Improvement Plan and endorse the improvements outlined in the Ombudsman report, and that we, crucially, note the links to the Future Sheffield and the community customer service. It's been a long meeting. Customer experience strategy, which will provide fundamental support and direction needed to improve and transform the way we handle and manage complaints. Are people happy with those recommendations? Thank you. And we'll just add our thanks to you for the work that you're doing and for coming and your patience today and sitting in a cold room. So that concludes our meeting today. And, oh, hang on, Councillor Dale?
I'm really sorry, this is not a criticism of anyone. I think it's just an oversight. But in this council, we agreed to recognise care experience as a protected characteristic, and there are 2 reports in this pack where the equality impact assessment, one of them, it's on there but it's not filled in, and another one, it's not even in there at all. So, and I did mention it at my previous committee. Can we please just make sure that it's just a standard template where at least it's in there so it can encourage people to recognise that? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really important point. It was an important decision that we took to make sure that care experienced, the voices and experience of care experienced people are considered, and we need to make sure that we're true to that. So thank you for raising that. And if everyone, colleagues here who are involved in the drafting of reports, and all of us, have got a role to play to make sure that we're checking and that we're holding the organisation to account on that particular point. So thank you, and thank you for everyone's contributions today. Thank you.